Week 2 of fall camp for Utah football is underway. So, what are the biggest takeaways from Kyle Whittingham and the players' media availability today? We're going to discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time listening to this show, make sure you like and subscribe. On today's show, talking all things fall camp, as well as a little fun thing at the end. Van Fillinger actually tried out for the WWE. I saw that and was really pleasantly surprised by that. So we'll talk about that at the very end. But first two things I want to focus on are all things fall camp related. Utah football, it's week 2 of fall camp. Today was the first day they were able to put the pads on today for this Utah team. It was their first live work, or I should say first live work with pads, excuse me, not their first day with pads, but their first live day with pads. And they did about 50 such snaps, according to Josh Furlong of KSL.com. So another really strong day, you can tell, for this Utah football team. So what we're going to do today, as I mentioned, is just dive into all of the takeaways, how we should feel about all of them, and just talk about what we find interesting. So the first thing that was discussed was Kyle Whittingham said, and all these are going to come to us from our good friend at KSL.com, Josh Furlong, who he said that Kyle Whittingham said he believes this team is in a really good place with where they're at in camp. Today was the first day of live work with pads, and they did about 50 snaps. Wayshawn Parker and Naquai Rogers had really good days. That to me says a couple things. Number one, just to have, as I've said before, I have some concerns and questions about this Utah defensive line that is a very new unit compared to what we saw last year. Just not a lot of returning production. That does leave me a little concerned about how the defensive line is holding up. But even when I say those concerns, I do need to remember, I think Utah is one of the 10 best offensive lines in college football this season, and they have absolutely the best tackle duo in the country. So there's going to be rushing lanes opened up. I think the other thing that's interesting about that is it wasn't just Wayshawn Parker who had a big day. Wayshawn Parker and Naquai Rogers. For those of you that may be going, who's Naquai Rogers? Well, that's the transfer back that Utah got from New Mexico. That's right. Jason Beck, Devin Dampier, those weren't the only guys. Also, don't forget about Ryan Davis. We're still kind of waiting to see if he's going to break out and what he's kind of going to bring to this offense. But I do think it's going to be productive things for this Utah team. He had 700 yards last year with Dampier. So I'm expecting him to have a strong season for this Utah passing attack. But another guy who could have a strong season is Naquai Rogers. When you're talking about Rogers, he was a junior last year with the Lobos, and he's a guy who was able to help them out and help them have one of the best offenses in college football season to go on a yards per game basis. Let's not forget what New Mexico was able to do on a yards per game basis. They were the 4th best mark in the country by that margin. So really impressive things that we were able to see out of that Lobo offense, and Naquai Rogers did play a role in that. But also Wayshawn Parker played a massive role in just how good Washington State's offense is. It wasn't just John Mateer, and it wasn't just their offensive coordinator. I just blanked on his name, but he's now the OC at Oklahoma too. So there's a lot of guys in there, but Naquai Rogers was able to, but Wayshawn Parker was a huge part of that success for those Cougars because he had over 700 yards on offense. Well, Rogers last year had 382 yards, mainly as the backup running back, but he's only continuing to grow and get better. This is a guy who, yes, he was at Campbell his first 2 years, but all 3 of his collegiate seasons, he's had over 300 yards rushing and over 4+ touchdowns in all of them. He's not much of a receiving back. Last year, just 14 receiving yards, but he's a guy, his physicality, the veteran presence. I've said for a while, I thought he would be their short yardage back, especially, but this is a guy who's averaged over 4 yards per carry all 3 years of his collegiate career. So if they feel like the best way to maximize this Utah rushing attack and backfield is Naquai Rogers and Wayshawn Parker, I'm all in on that. I think the fresher you can keep those guys, the better. Last year, it was an issue of there was such a clear drop-off whenever Mekhi Bernard was not in the game that you had to keep him out on the field as much as possible. But if there's not a drop-off when you go to Parker to Rogers, I think that would be absolutely great. So I've been in the mindset that it's going to be Wayshawn Parker as the bell cow guy, but Naquai Rogers might make that a 2-headed monster. In some ways, you could say a 3-headed monster in Utah's backfield because Devin Dampier is going to eat and get his in the ground game as well. A guy who had over 1,000 yards rushing last year, several games over 100 yards rushing. And this has just been my favorite stat. So I'm sorry, I keep saying it so much, but PFF's tied for the lead with John Mateer, that Washington State quarterback, for most forced missed tackles last year in college football. So you cannot take the running game away from Devin Dampier, especially when he did a great job showing the ability to dodge those big hits at a high level. That's what he was only sacked 5 times and just did a good job at not putting himself in harm's way too much. Last year, junior quarterback now, played a lot of college football. I trust him when he's running around the open field to slide, make the smart plays and not get his head taken off or get hurt. Sometimes Cam would try to fight for those extra yards, which we love that in our quarterback, right? That he was willing to go out there, give it his all, but sometimes you also risk getting injured. And that's where I think Devin Dampier is going to, hey, he'll get out of bounds or just slide down and it's okay. Like, hey, we don't need the extra yard by taking the contact here. Let's just live to fight another down. And I think Dampier will do a good job of that because Dampier's been doing a really good job too. Kyle Whittingham actually said that Dampier had a really good day moving the first team offense down the field. Said it remains a dual heat, though, when it comes to the backup quarterback spot, that being the battle between Isaac Wilson and Bird Ficklin. And that will continue through the scrimmage on Saturday. Said Isaac Wilson has had a really good fall camp overall. So that's something that's definitely encouraging is that we have this another backup quarterback competition. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I'm really excited that Devin Dampier continues to make the strides and just is in sync and in rhythm with this offense. Did I think he was going to be? Yes, of course, because it's Jason Beck, the same offense he's with, but it's still encouraging that Utah is hitting the ground running. If things were going bad, would Kyle Whittingham tell us? No, probably not. But I do think it's encouraging that this offense is showing a lot of progress and just seem to be primed to make a lot of plays too, because Utah did have some receivers that continue to step up and make some things happen too, which I also find very encouraging that we continue to hear good things about the Tobias Merriweather. Last week was Larry Simmons, who was earning some stuff. This week, Darren Zipper is another guy in there too. Could end up being Utah's top 3 receivers, but as I mentioned too, I wouldn't rule out Ryan Davis either. So the receivers were another group that turned heads too. And a reminder, we didn't get to hear from the defensive players today. So this is all offensive media availability too. We actually did. I saw some clips that were released earlier though of some of the coaches' availability with some of the other coaches on the offensive staff or just some of the other positions. It was put out on Sammy Mora's YouTube page. And one thing that she had the clip of Jim Harding's interview. Jim Harding talked about that I'm just very encouraged by is we continue to hear how Caleb Lomu as well as Spencer Fano have done a good job of avoiding all the press clippings about themselves. I shouldn't say avoiding, but they know about it, but they recognize like, hey, we need to continue to grow and get better. And guys like that too is Jaron Kump. He knows that he needs to continue to grow and get better. And Jim Harding was talking about how Jaron knows that he needs to just continue to work on being more consistent and put all the little pieces together. He also spoke about how, hey, Michael Mokafisi was injured in the spring, so he wasn't available to run through some of the stuff with this offense. So they're getting him back up to speed nice and quickly, which I think is very encouraging. This is the best offensive line in the Big 12 to me. I think there's some like a Texas Tech could also end up having a good offensive line, but they don't have 2 first-round picks to tackle, and they don't have all 5 starters coming back from a good unit from a season to go to. I've talked about it before. I don't know if this Utah offensive line right now is one of the 5 best in the country. I still just have some questions about the interior, but overall, easily one of the 10 best and going to provide plenty of time for Devin Dampier in this passing attack to make plays downfield. But who's going to step up at the pass-catching spots? We got to figure that out too, and who is Utah's backup quarterback going to be? We're diving into that and so much more as we continue to recap the latest media availability and takeaways from fall camp in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make the games even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right in the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel Sportsbook has you covered for football season 2, NFL, college football, whatever action you're feeling, you can find it at FanDuel today. The battle for the backup quarterback spot is something that every year has kind of been a story with this Utah team, because for the last couple of years, whether it's been since Cam Rising took over and then just all the years of Cam Rising, we've known that Cam's going to be the guy, right? So the question has always been, okay, who's going to be the backup quarterback? Because there hasn't been a clear pecking order, whether it's Nate Johnson and Bryson Barnes or Bryson Barnes and Brandon Rose, or last year, right, Isaac Wilson versus Brandon Rose. And now here we are of Isaac Wilson versus Bird Ficklin. If you're someone who's unfamiliar with Bird Ficklin, he was a 3-star recruit that Utah just landed in the most recent class. Ficklin was one of the guys that Utah was able to land. He was the 53rd ranked quarterback in the country, 21st player in the state of Oklahoma. He was an early enrollee, and it's hard for true freshmen to earn their way on the field early. And the fact that Ficklin is already competing with Isaac Wilson is a very encouraging sign. If you've forgotten the season Wilson had last year, threw for 1,510 yards, 10 touchdowns, 11 picks, was sacked 19 times. And I will say, I felt like a lot of those sacks were on Wilson. So I can't sit here and say, like, based on what we saw from Wilson last year, that I feel great about the backup quarterback spot. He did have that really nice throw. I know that blew up on social media where he found, I think it was Larry Simmons, but that's also in practice where the quarterback can't be touched. And the biggest thing with Wilson he struggled with last season was when he was under duress. And Bert Ficklin also, he's a tremendous quarterback, but also a really good athlete as well. He's going to be able to do similar things to Devin Dampier from a standpoint of escaping pressure better than a Isaac Wilson can. But he's also a true freshman, so he's nowhere near the quarterback, the passer that Devin Dampier is. Ficklin is just a guy who he's obviously impressed a lot of people already, and he looked very good in the spring game too. But, Witt said that Isaac's had a very good fall camp, so I do find that encouraging. For me personally, and I've said this a little bit now, if Devin Dampier gets hurt, I still would strongly consider putting Nate Johnson as your quarterback there. Some of you may be like, oh, we weren't good when we had Nate Johnson at quarterback last time. Yeah, but they weren't very good when they had Isaac Wilson there either last year. So Nate has a lot more just experience, and Nate's athleticism is something that he's one of the fastest players on this roster. So he is going to be a threat every time the ball in his hands. I'd love to see if Utah could experiment with some kind of just almost like Army style offense where it's just like, we're going to run the ball. We have like Nate Johnson and like Wayshawn Parker and maybe getting Rodgers in there as well too. Just doing some wild things and just trying to overwhelm teams with an offensive line. Like that would almost be my preference. But if they feel like Wilson is ready, I do trust Jason Beck and this staff to put the Utah offense in the best position to succeed. So I will trust them if they put Isaac Wilson out there. That trust can be taken away very quickly if he's out there and he hasn't improved. But I do believe that he's had a good fall camp so far. He had a very good camp last year too. Wilson, let's not forget, Rose was the backup quarterback leaving spring ball. And then Wilson had started to take that job right as Rose got the injury that left him out for most of last season anyways too. So to me, this is a situation where right now, if it's not going to be Nate Johnson's next guy, if he's truly just an athlete and not going to be much of a quarterback for this team, and they're rolling with Isaac Wilson or Bert Ficklin, I would rather it be Isaac just because he has a season of collegiate football under his belt, and it's very hard for true freshmen to come in and have success. Look at a Dylan Raiola last year for Nebraska. You might be saying, like, I thought he was decent. Well, they didn't make a bowl game. Like, he had some nice moments, but overall it wasn't great, and it's very hard to play as a true freshman at the quarterback spot. So I hope that Utah does not thrust Bert Ficklin out there, has him redshirt learn instead, and if he's the best man for the job, that's fine. Throw him out there. But I have my concerns, and I hope that instead Utah rolls out with Isaac Wilson. If it's indeed not going to be Nate Johnson, because based on what's been reported, they haven't been doing anything with Nate at the quarterback spot, but we know they plan to use him in creative ways. One thing I'm really excited to see is just who's going to emerge for this Utah team in a pass catching department. And one guy who might be able to is JJ Buchanan. You also, if you're new and just tune in for once fall camp kind of starts gearing up, you might be like, once again, like, who is JJ Buchanan? Well, JJ Buchanan is another early enrollee, a 6'4". He's listed at 208 on the bio. I think Fred Whittingham Jr. the other day said he was up to more closer to like either 215 or 225. I know there's a large difference between 10 pounds. I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but the freshman tight end is a guy who was an early enrollee. He was a 4-star prospect, rated the number 4th player out of Nevada. He was a do-it-all type of player, right? This is a guy who had 688 receiving yards on 38 catches and 3 touchdowns as a junior. But also, how about his senior season? He had 1,000 yards receiving and 11 touchdowns and 60 tackles. So a two-way force. I thought he was going to redshirt this season. Fred Whittingham Jr. mentioned him being a special teams guy for Utah, though, maybe too. But the fact that he's impressing so far is, I'll just say remarkable. I mean, the fact that he has just got up, they moved him to tight end, and he's already got a chance to play right away is a huge credit and a compliment to his skill set too. So I take that as a very encouraging sign that he is already like earning some praise from Kyle Whittingham for making some plays and doing some things out there. Utah tight ends room is wide open. We did a show on it earlier this week. They're actually still waiting on some eligibility things from Josiah Jefferson. So we'll see if he ends up being able to play this fall, or maybe he ends up having to sit out in redshirt. But outside of him, like, how much Lander Barton are we going to see on offense, which we did talk about Lander and Smith. So we'll discuss that momentarily too. Otto Tia is a guy 500 yards last year at Utah State as a receiver, but didn't have the best spring. Hunter Andrews is making the transition over to tight end. I like what we saw from the spring game, but that was a very small and limited sample. And then you have the traditional tight end and Dallin Bentley, but JJ Buchanan is the one who earned the rave reviews today. So How does that lead to this room shaking out? I'm very intrigued. I'm still skeptical of how much Buchanan we're going to see, but it'll be interesting to continue to watch and monitor the reports and responses that trickle out from fall camp to see if he is a guy who continues to raise his way up the depth chart. So we don't know about Buchanan, but we do feel pretty good about Tobias Merriweather, right? And he did say that the wide receivers made big strides so far. He highlighted, and this once again comes to us from Josh Furlong, Tobias Merriweather and Darren Zipper as two guys standing out so far. And I think that's amazing that Merriweather is one of the guys who's standing out. This is a guy who we want to see if he can put it all together. At Notre Dame and Cal, injuries and inconsistencies when he was healthy plagued him. But last year was mostly injuries, and it felt like he was going to be one of the top guys for Cal. This is a former 4-star recruit, so he has sky-high potential for what he can be. I think he can be a legit number one receiver, and not just an elite one in the Big 12, but in college football in general. When you talk about that 6'5", 200-pound size, the frame, the ability to run a bevy of routes too, and he's a guy who can go up top and high point the ball too. And Devin Dampier's a guy, if you earn his trust, he gave his receivers chances. Luke Wyson was his favorite target. Then it was Ryan Davis at New Mexico. And he would give Wyson tons of chances to go upstairs and make a grab. And I think he's going to give Mayweather the same credit there. Love seeing Darren Zipper as a guy who's been able to stand out and make some things happen too. He's a guy we didn't get to see a ton of last year, right? Just 8 catches, 122 yards, 15 yards per catch. But he did have moments where it was like, okay, you can see he's starting to put it all together. And it was also like, let's just be real, right? It was very difficult to make plays in this Utah offense because the passing attack last year was dreadful. But we saw him in that game against Iowa State, which is also where we saw Rabbit Evans really start to break out. He had 4 catches for 66 yards, his longest going for 46 in that one too. Smith Snowden was the first one who kind of mentioned Zipper being a guy that my eyes perked up at Big 12 Media Day. You can go back and watch my interview with him. I asked him about like what wide receivers are stepping up, making plays, like who are going to be some of the guys this fall. And he said he loved the room as a whole, but he also like went out of his way to highlight or just mention, not out of his way, but he mentioned Darren Zipper as a guy who he thinks is going to step up and have a big season. And Zipper was the guy who was a lot of excitement when he was coming in last year. Another one of the true freshmen who earned his way onto the field. So got some playing experience under his belt, grew as the season went on. That's a big thing that doesn't get talked about in season development. We see it all throughout college football. Spencer Fano got better as his first year went on. Zipper's a guy who got better as his first year went on last year. And I think he's got a chance to be one of these team's 3 best receivers. It sounds like right now that Merriweather, Simmons, Zipper, and then I just still think in some capacity we'll see Ryan Davis because of that connection with Devin Dampier make his way into this. But encouraged that some pass catching options are starting to emerge for this Utah football team. Speaking of starting to emerge, Utah has a few guys starting to emerge in their cornerback room. Josh Furlong reported that Whittingham said 3 or 4 guys in the mix in the corner spot opposite Scooby Davis. Said Jackson Benny has been doing well enough at the nickel that Smith Snowden is getting more work at corner, but he remains the starter at the nickel. Utah did a really good job of retooling the corner spot. There is no one in that room to me on an outside corner level. I think the best corner Utah has in total would have been Smith Snowden this year. But I think their best outside corner was Cameron Calhoun. Unfortunately, he hit the transfer portal, of course, and is now with the Alabama Crimson Tide. But Utah landed an Auburn transfer. They had, I just forgot, I think it's a Furman transfer they landed too, but they got another community college edition there as well. And then I've been talking about Blake Cotton for a very long time, the UC Davis transfer who started 3 years in the Big Sky. I think that he is going to be the guy who ends up claiming that other spot. But the fact that Utah has so many bodies there, I think is big because number one, there's almost always injuries that occur at those defensive back spots. I mean, you look at a couple years ago, right? It wasn't Miles Battle. I think there was, last year. Kenan Johnson, I want to say, and that could be wrong. He was the Georgia Tech transfer. He got hurt in the very first game, and then Utah had to figure out the rest of their cornerback room from there. So it's just nice to have extra bodies in that cornerback room because you never know where their injuries are going to come from. And I think it's really good. And it's also just a position that, you have to be able to go. You never know what a receiver is going to do, right? So you got to be able to react and be at full speed and full strength because you're already going to be at least a split second behind because you don't know exactly what route they're going to do and what they're going to run. So I think it's a really good news that this Utah team has depth in the defensive backfield. I thought they would, but I love that multiple corners are emerging. Sharif Shaw, Morgan Scalley did a good job in the transfer portal, and Utah will be well poised to keep up one of the best secondaries in the Big 12 last year, and I think could continue to be that in 2025. Also, Utah's going to be using some Smith Snowden and Lander Barton on offense. We've touched on that a little bit, but Kyle Whittingham opened up about what that's looked like so far in practice. We got to talk about that. And I mentioned Van Fillinger tried out for the WWE. So we got a little bit of a curveball to talk about too as we come back one moment and talk about all of that. All righty, Utah on offense, getting a little creative. Lander Barton and Smith Snowden are two of the top defenders that Utah has. But as Utah has done before, they're like, hey, it's worked with Sione Vaki, and the position changes have just done well for this team. They moved Teo Johnson to safety. They're like, let's try to unlock and see if we can find our Sione Vaki again, a guy who Vaki signed at safety and on offense. And they're looking to have Lander Barton be one of the tight ends and Smith Snowden fill in at receiver. This comes to us from Josh Furlong again, who said Whittingham said that Smith Snowden has looked really good on offense. It's been a great addition for us. And yeah, that Lander Barton has looked good on offense too so far. So first thing right there too is when it says that Smith Snowden has looked really good on offense, the way, and we'll see like how much Lander we see, but I could see Smith playing more on offense than Lander. I just think Lander is going to take on such a load defensively. Linebacker as well is such a physical position. Like, yes, safety was as well what Vaki was doing, but you're not involved in a car crash every single play like you are on every run play if you're Lander Barton on the offensive line, as a linebacker smashing into offensive linemen and trying to take down some big imposing Big 12 backs too. So for me, I don't think we'll see as much Lander on offense. I think we'll see some. I could see a fair amount of Smith Snowden on offense because Utah clearly has some questions there if they decided to move Smith Snowden to that side. He was a really productive receiver in high school, an explosive return man. And he did say like he's going to be doing some more return stuff in the interview I had with him at Big 12 Media Day. So Smith is one of the most explosive players on this roster. And I do think it's a good decision that Utah is going to continue to just try to maximize his explosive potential and not just use him as a guy who's going to help shut down opposing receivers, but why not then flip to the other side and be one of the guys who's making those big plays, big catches, and big grabs. Really encouraged by what Smith Snowden is going to do for this team on both sides of the ball. So those were the biggest things from fall camp that stood out to me. Let me know what I missed in the comments below. Really encouraged about the defensive backfield, right? They have so many guys that are playing at a high level. And that was another thing that Witt said was that they're not looking for someone to emerge. It's more just about trying to get them reps and that they may just play by committee at the corner spot. That was another thing that Kyle Whittingham echoed at Big 12 Media Days today. So I think it's incredibly encouraging that this Utah team has multiple defensive backs. I think it's great that we're starting to see some of the receivers step up. I like that we could have a two-headed monster in the backfield. What I would say then is like, okay, so what do we still need to see? What do we need to learn? We need to figure out what this defensive line is going to look like because as the wide receivers start to step up, we need to know which defensive linemen are stepping up. Who are going to be the guys who are getting after the quarterback on fourth down? Are the top two defensive tackles for sure Dallas Vakalaki and Aliki Vaimaki? Defensive tackle, another position that you just get a lot of tread on the tires and the physicality and the demands that it requires. You need good backups there. So who are then going to be those backups for Utah football? They got to figure that out along the defensive line, but encouraged by where this team is at. Love the quotes we're hearing from Kyle Whittingham and the players, and it'll be interesting to see what we get to hear from the defense coming up too as Utah continues to prepare for the 2025 football season. Mentioned the holes that Utah has defensively. One of those is defensive end because Van Fillinger is gone. He's no longer with this Utah football program as he graduated. And Van was a guy who was a huge part of this team's success going back to the first Pac-12 title, helped them go back to back and helped this Utah defense be elite every year he was with them. Well, Van graduated. Still surprisingly to me, he was not picked up. Like he is just such a physical presence. Yes, he's not the most explosive pass rusher, but such a strong defender against the run and was a guy that and he battled injuries last year too. So like if he could have stayed healthy, I still think could have grown into a pass rush presence. So I'm a little surprised that he didn't get an opportunity as a free agent invite after last season. But Van is a guy who, hey, what's he going to do next? Well, Van Fillinger had a WWE tryout. And I just think that's tremendous for him. I mean, also just Van as well. He's one of those guys that when he walks into a room, you're like, whoa, who is that? He's got the height, the length, and the build to me to be a WWE superstar. So I love that Van had a tryout and is potentially, we'll see what it leads to. He just posted he had the tryout, but would love to see him get that opportunity because obviously, whether it's on the football field or elsewhere, we love seeing guys who went to Utah and played for Utah go on to have success. I remember Bama Laseni tried out for the WWE a couple of years ago, right? So there's a couple of these Utah guys that end up getting that chance and that opportunity apparently with the WWE. And I love that Van got a shot. Would love to see him find that success in it and just hoping he finds success in whatever he chooses as well. As I said, I feel like it should still be on the football field where Van Fillinger is competing and having success. But either way, excited for him to hopefully get a chance in the WWE, craft the character, all the things that go along with that. I would love to be able to say my favorite WWE superstar or just favorite WWE wrestler even is Van Fillinger, former Utah defensive end that I have fond memories watching get like 3 sacks against Washington State a couple of years ago. So that would be absolutely tremendous. But it's also just, I'll say, absolutely tremendous, the progress that Utah football is making so far in fall camp. That's going to do it on today's edition of Locked On Utes. Greatly appreciate all of you who listen to the very end of this show. Leave your thoughts and comments down below. What do you still need to see from this Utah football team? How are you feeling about the season? Would love to see some record predictions too. That's something I'm going to be talking about soon coming up on one of my shows. But thank you again for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. If you're in the market for a second listen, Locked On College Football, any of our Locked On shows have you covered as it pertains to all things fall camp related. Camp Kyle will continue to roll on, and we will continue to roll on covering the Utah Utes every single day. Also, for those of you that are listening to the end, I want to just throw this out in a reminder. Some of you might have noticed, we will have an episode every single day dropping until Utah football plays a game. So make sure you tune in to Locked On Utes because the content does not stop as Utah football does not stop their preparations for the 2025 season. We hope to see you again tomorrow.